Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast, and this weekend I saw a movie that was great. And one of the things that I really liked about the movie that I saw was that they were bold enough to step away from the main protagonist and his very interesting story to go and give us an extended sequence to establish the bad guy, the main threat, to tell us about his character and his skill set and the motivation and the support system behind him. Granted, it wasn't a huge chunk of the film, but there was enough there for me to say, oh, wow, put a pin in that. That dude is going to be a problem later on. Likewise, in Nehemiah chapter 2, we get the hint of who is going to be a problem later on here in verse 10, when Nehemiah writes the following. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Put a pin in that. He's going to be a problem. That's the hint. And then the narrative is going to move forward here in just a second. Now, as we talked about yesterday, this Sanballat fellow is mentioned outside of the Bible. And I think there's some stuff outside of the Bible that we learn about him that might help us understand better why he proves to be a bit of a pain in the butt here in Nehemiah. But let's move forward with the story into this cool cinematic scene that I was teasing yesterday. It goes like this. Verse 11. I, Nehemiah, went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I hadn't told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, fist bump, that's a funny name, examining the walls of Jerusalem which had been broken down and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials didn't know where I'd gone or what I was doing because as yet I'd said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. That's a pretty cool scene, right? This is the old under-promise, over-deliver thing. Rather than coming in on the white horse and yelling about all the things that he's going to do and accomplish, Nehemiah is shrewdly taking advantage of the fact that most people really don't have any idea what the plan is here or who that guy is, or if they do know and word is starting to get out around the city, why the king's cupbearer would be here. This all seems like it's happening really fast to you and me, but remember, these people in Jerusalem have been sitting around looking at those walls and those burned out gates for a long time. Now, maybe you're the type of person who, as soon as something goes wrong in your environment, you're like, no, I'm not messing around with that. We're fixing it right now. Broken window theory. We leave that scuff on the floorboard right there. It's just going to turn into 5 scuffs. We fix things. Or maybe you're like me, and emotionally, you got to stare at that mess for a while. You got to look at that thing and get used to it a little bit, until you get to the point where you say, all right, enough's enough. It's time for me to go and knock out a few of these blemishes and things that have gone wrong in my environment. Finally going to fix that nick, that scuff. But if you're anything like me, you got to be careful, because if you sit there and look at it too long, it becomes a metaphor for never getting anything done and never fixing anything. But if you wait just the right amount of time, then it becomes a metaphor for really taking ground and knocking stuff out. These people hadn't just had their walls torn down and their gate burned out. It had been like this for a while, and they were kind of getting used to it. Nehemiah is assessing the city, but he's also assessing the people. You also got to figure, dude is assessing where the attacks happened. Okay, where's it really bad? And what are the real problems here? Why would enemies attack this spot and this spot? Why are they burning out that particular gate? What is the potential risk to my people that some of this damage is so bad that this area needs to be useful, but we can only get through single file, if at all, right here? There's some glaring issues. If the right person wanted to wreak havoc on us and they had any sense of strategy, they would pinch us here, they would hit us here, they would hit us here. I think that's the kind of stuff that he's sizing up. So it's not just political shrewdness that would cause him to go out and, under the cover of darkness, maybe under a full moon, cinematically sneak around the city, maybe wearing a cloak with the hood pulled down like some kind of Jedi in disguise, with only one mount, and maybe his accompanying soldiers sort of discreetly armed and clothed as well. No, I don't think it's just political discretion, I think he's also trying not to tip his hand and inceptionize to his enemies who are mingled among the people. They're right there. He doesn't want to inceptionize to his enemies where the weak points are and what he's observing as he develops his plan for all of this. I think these are the reasons why the initial inspection is happening in the dark. Well, what does he see? Massive problems. What he sees is that the report that he got from his brother Hanani back in chapter 1 is indeed true. The people and the fortifications are in disrepair. Verse 17. Then I, Nehemiah, said to them, "You see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. This is interesting because maybe to you and me, we're like, well, the power of the king, he's just going to go and rebuild the thing because the king said to do it. He's got things like clay chunks or whatever that are all scratched up. That means you have to do it. You got to rebuild the thing. There's a letter. There's a note. The king said so. Well, the king's a long, long ways away, and we have a way we do things around here. And who exactly is going to do this work? Oh, us? We're just going to volunteer to rebuild these things. What about our jobs? We think that this is just a wave of an executive wand that Nehemiah is going to make here, the king's going to make, and everything will happen. But it isn't like that at all. And we can see that by the fact that Nehemiah has to be shrewd and persuasive about getting everybody signed up. So what we get, presumably the next day here, after this cinematic under the cover of darkness inspection of the damage, is Nehemiah repeating back to the people the report that he received 1,000+ miles away several months earlier to tell them or point out to them what is happening right under their own noses. Nehemiah could see it more clearly from half a continent away than the people there could see in front of their own faces. But much like we see in Ezra, once a leader shows up and says, we got to do something, these people can be moved. They've got enough of a sense of history to know something needs to happen. They just lack for leadership. Verse 18, it says, they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Boom, we're off and running. This is amazing. Verse 19, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab, we're adding another one here, heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? So that little investment story-wise that we got here a page earlier in a bad guy who's looming in the shadows, gossiping, embittered, complaining. He has rival plans. He's calculating a way to be difficult, but he has to wait for Nehemiah to make his first move before Sanballat can then go and make his first obfuscating move to undermine Nehemiah. Aha, that investment is now paying off. We're seeing why it was back there in verse 10. Sanballat is turning over his cards, and they are not good cards. We now know that he's not just going to be opposed to this work, but he's just going to lob crazy political accusations. Oh, this guy's an insurrectionist. He's trying to undercut the king. This is dangerous. We got to do something about this guy. Nehemiah has persuaded the people and seems to have unity. Remember, that is one of the big questions of Ezra and Nehemiah. Can these people pull together and accomplish something and pull in the same direction for the first time in centuries? Or will they continue to do things the way they've done it for so long, which is consistently fumble the ball and fail to be God's people unified, doing the next obvious thing in keeping with what God has for them? Well, it looks really good here in Nehemiah chapter 2, but now the resistance wraps up and we still haven't got to those extra biblical sources that maybe give us some hints as to why Sanballat is so bent out of shape. And we are going to get to those, but first, let's wrap up this chapter by seeing how Nehemiah responds. I answered them, this is Nehemiah talking to his opponents, Sanballat and his buddies. I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We as servants will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to us. That conversation has been going on for the better part of 100 years at this point. Remember all the way back in Ezra when the eventual enemies or maybe the secret enemies came along and said to Zerubbabel, we'll help you build things. We're here now. We want to be a part of your thing. We totally do. What does Zerubbabel say? what would that be, 90 years earlier? You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. This is Ezra 4:3. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us. So there's a whole lot of symmetry here. Resistance has gone on for the better part of a century. The resistance is coming from people who it looks like are sort of cousin people to the returning Jewish exiles. And there is a subtle public political wrestling for control of this project. And in both situations, as soon as leadership appears and steps up and says, we're going to do this thing and we're going to move forward, there's jeering, complaining, and undermining that appears from the fringes. And this time around, that opposition has a name, and it's Sanballat, and we will learn more about him next time around. Look at that. We just took a ton of ground here. And as weird as it sounds, as I'm looking ahead, chronologically, for you and me in real time, we are not that far away from needing to make a decision about what we are going to do for our next book of the Bible. And at this point, I can tell you only this much. I have thought about it a lot, and the next book is going to be in the New Testament. I'll tell you more about what I'm thinking as we get a little bit closer to the occasion. All right, more on Nehemiah next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.